Hi everyone, welcome back to the Quiet Rebellion. This is Catie, and we have Catie from Reskillience with us today. How are you, Catie?
I am so well. I'm actually a little bit steamy. I'm recording in the back of a van, and I can feel the temperature rising, but I'm going to try and keep my cool.
There we go. We'll do the best we can. So you're in Australia, and I'm in Northwest Montana, and it was like 96 degrees here Fahrenheit yesterday, which is really quite warm. But then today it's all the way back down to like 76, so it's quite lovely.
Yeah,
But now
wow.
you're almost, it's winter, right? Or almost spring, I guess, at this point.
It's definitely coming into spring.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're traveling up the north coast or the east and north aspect of the country at the moment. So we've come from a really cold little pocket in central Victoria, which is kind of down the south of the continent. And we're wending our way up. And as we go, the springtime is strengthening because obviously it gets so much hotter towards the equator. And I'm absolutely loving this feeling of like tracking towards the warmth and the sun. So it's quite warm here today. I think after this, I'm going to peel off all my layers and jump into the sea.
Very nice. Very nice. I'm just going to fill everybody else in on the reason I particularly asked you for this episode was that I listened to your podcast, Reskillience, and there was an episode, it's been several months now, where you talked about the wonderment of weariness and the blessings of bedrag, which I found so poetic and I loved, and it just stuck with me. And it stuck with me because I can relate to those feelings, right? Like this idea, like when the wonderment, because I'm a gardener, and like, like after you're done with all that planting in the spring and you're just exhausted, but it's like such a good feeling and you sleep really good, but you're like really hopeful, right? That the bugs aren't going to come or that it's going to rain enough or just whatever. Like you just have so much hope and wonderment. So can you kind of tell us how you came to those particular phrases or just this idea in general? Like how did it come to you?
Yeah. Well, Catie, thank you so much for having me, by the way. Like, it's
Yeah.
so cool to connect with you over the oceans and see a little glimpse inside your world. You've got these amazing fairy lights and feathers in the background, and it just feels like quite surreal to be on this side of the microphone too, because as we mentioned off air, I'm in your position normally. I am definitely not a practice speaker. I love probing people and asking people what's on their minds. So I am as interested as you are to see what's going to come out today. And
Yeah.
I suppose to respond to your question, like part of me is tempted just to say, man, I say a lot of things. Like I'm a writer. I am always like throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. And I'm really heartened to hear that actually stuck with you, because I never know what's going to land with people. And maybe what
Sure.
what you were tuning into there was like the seeming contrast or paradox of those things. How can bedragglement be a blessing? How can weariness, fatigue, exhaustion lead to wonderment? And I guess as a writer, I've intuitively had this sense of contrast and paradox, offering like a pop or something, something that's awakening and makes us think, makes us go, oh, wait a second, like there's something else here. So maybe like, how I came to those phrases in particular is a mystery to me. They just tumble out sometimes. But what it leads me to think about is when I was in my mid-20s and I'd studied a couple of different things, but I was working as a naturopath in Sydney, which is like a major urban centre in Australia. And even though I was doing something that I really loved, I felt very invested in at a soul level, I was in this concrete jungle feeling quite dizzy, with all of the sounds and smells and claustrophobia of that city environment. And something just did not feel right inside of me. I so strongly recall having this tug at the hem, as one of my mentors, Claire Dunn, calls it, something just like pulling me in a different direction. And I ended up listening to that. I quit my awesome job with a wonderful woman in a brilliant clinical setting that probably would have led to a successful career in that field. And I packed it all down. I packed up my car and I jumped on a boat which took me to Tasmania. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Tasmania, Catie. It's a little island off the island of Australia. It's right down south, and it has a reputation for being a place where people really seek out a deeper connection to the wild. It's quite untouched. It has a lot of natural beauty. And I just had this yearning to go down there and see what was happening in farming and nature and agriculture. So when I made that jump and I really stepped into this unknown mystery, this path that seemingly wanted me to follow along, not that I knew where it was leading. I discovered that on those farms, so I started volunteering on small-scale farms in Tasmania because I wanted to learn about the food system. That was my background as a naturopath, food, nutrition. I was like, well, where does food even come from? What does soil feel like? What does it mean to germinate a seed? Like, I had all of these questions around very basic, fundamental tenets of our life as human beings. And so I rocked up to these farms without really having done a day of hard physical labor in my life. And I so distinctly remember a couple of occasions. One was I was raking a field, or like hoeing and raking these beds to prepare them for the planting of potatoes. And we just did that, myself and the other volunteers on this little farm outside, like for hours and hours and hours on end. And my back was seizing up and my arms were cramping and my neck was twinging. And I just remember the feeling of absolute euphoria after that really physical day of just hands in the dirt, soil, up all up in my nose and behind my ears, and just like the physicality of that and the embodiment of that and the hard, purposeful work in service of something that I loved, potatoes. That really awakened me to this idea that maybe a good life isn't necessarily an easy life or a comfortable life. Maybe a good life requires a little bit of grit and a little bit of effort and a little bit of like hard work connecting with the things that really support us, the soil, the web of life. So yeah, on numerous occasions down there, like I just felt this ecstasy of being, after a really long hot day, splitting firewood, planting potatoes, whatever it might have been, just being able to have that little sliver of time at the end of the day where I'd have a cold drink and sit around with my friends and just bask in having done something productive and human. And so I think that's like a very long-winded answer to your question, where something sparked in me, some realization, it came up to challenge this belief that I have, that probably a lot of people have in our culture, that a good life means comfort and ease and convenience. But I was feeling actually the opposite of that a good life was very much to do with having, contrasting sensations and textures and hot and cold and tired and rested. And that really started me on a much longer path that I'll probably end that story there.
Have you, I just want to know, because you keep saying The Good Life, which is great, but have you read the books, The Good Life books by Helen and Scott Nearing by any chance? They're Americans, but...
I have not. No.
They're older books. I feel like they were probably in the 60s they were written.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that you would really like them if you can get your hands on a copy. They're older books. They're older than I am. They're a generation or two older than I am. But Helen Nearing, in one of the books, talks about the fact that, like, we lose a lot when we just go to the store and exchange money for something. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you make something, whether it's clothes or you garden or you do whatever, you have an appreciation for what goes into it. And that's really what makes a good life, is having an appreciation for the work. I think you really love those books. I'll link to those books. I don't even know if they're still in print. I have a very old copy that someone had given me. I'm very honored to have. But they're really great.
Amazing.
Books. I feel like just when you said that, I was like, oh, I wonder, because you kept saying The Good Life. I was like, I wonder if she's read those books. Okay. And I think that was a great answer. And something else you said in the podcast, and you kind of hinted at it a little bit here, is about zombifying, which I loved, because we can so easily become zombies, kind of without our permission and without even noticing, if we're not careful. And I talk about this a lot on the podcast, right? You have to be really intentional when we're trying to live a simple life. And it's really easy to be distracted, especially now, especially in this particular time period, because we have these devices, our phones, our laptops, our whatevers, like they're designed to keep us on them. But we do just kind of become this zombie.
Yeah.
If we're not careful. Do you have an idea of how we can, besides just turning it off, which is obviously a thing, but not all of us can do that all the time, or would want to. But how can we kind of de-zombify our life so that we can have this wonderment of weariness, so that we can do some other things and realize it's not so good?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I'm interested to listen to more of your back catalogue too, Catie, and really understand your perspective on this. And it's obviously, I think, what most people would be able to recognize in themselves to varying degrees in this society, this sense of numbness, disconnection. I mean, I say zombie with my tongue firmly planted in my cheek, because it kind of evokes apocalyptic images of hordes coming over the mountain to feast on our flesh and brains. But I mean, I think the devices are feasting on our brains at this point. So
Yes.
What I noticed, and not to shame the cityscape or people who live in the city environment, but when I very infrequently venture into the city on the train, like the last time I was in there, I just noticed a lot of people who would probably fit that description, right? Like I was probably the only person on the train carriage looking around and trying to make eye contact with people, like staring at them intensely and willing them to connect with me, because everyone's just on their phones. And then in the street, I feel like, very broken souls walking around, bumping into one another. And it struck me that the zombie apocalypse is probably already here in many respects. Like I think so many of us feel completely severed from our life support systems. How little do we touch the earth with our bare feet? How little do we expose our body to the sun? How rare it would be to sit in circle around a fire in the forest. And I just noticed this zombification that was already happening in the city. It's not some far off apocalypse. It's like,
no,
we actually, as you say, really need to protect that inner human spirit that we have in order to resist these advances of probably the technology that we're surrounded by. And so when I realized this, zombie apocalypse could already be here. One thing I want to say is that if ever I personally notice a part of myself that feels problematic or that I'm really struggling with zombification, instead of, and I'm very much practicing this at the moment, but instead of thinking, how do I get free of this inner zombie? How do I, cut this guy loose? He's not serving my highest good. I actually am inspired by the work of people like Richard Schwartz, who talks about parts theory. It's like, be really curious about that inner zombie. Like, what is that numbness and disconnection telling us about the way that we're living? Maybe it is the signal, the wayfinder that we need to try and track in a bit of a different direction, because really looking at like, what is that discord? What is that discontent that sits there underneath? I think that's like really fertile ground for us to inquire into as people too. So before any kind of solution-oriented de-zombification, I just wanted to make reference to, parts theory or internal family systems by Richard Schwartz, and that idea of befriending and really relating with those parts of ourselves that seem like they're defeating us at what we want to do, because they're always, I think, exclusively there for a really good reason. So why is it that we're numbing ourselves? Why do we feel disconnected? Maybe it's because we've created this society, this culture that does not meet our primary human needs. And when you actually go to that place, you start thinking, well, how can I change that? How can I change that for myself? And how can I be part of a different culture that doesn't necessitate that we cut off from it because it is so damn bad? So I think leaning into that discontent and seeing it as a portal is also a really powerful thing to do before we just try and run away from it and shut it down. But if we do want to try and wake ourselves up and breathe a little bit more life back into our soul and spirit, if we're feeling that zombified, feeling like we're in that zombified state, I mean, the smallest things can reconnect us. I mean, I think if we're feeling that numbness, it's like it's a loss of connection. It's like the signal's dropped out for a minute. So even the simplest thing, like, where is the moon? Is it over there in the sky? How full is it? Is it, like how closely tracking, where is it at in its cycle, and where am I at in my cycle? If I'm a woman, where is the sun rising on the horizon? Can I wake up and see the sun tomorrow morning rise and crack over that eastern horizon? Little tiny observances like that, I think, remind us that there is this big, beautiful, mysterious world that we are part of. And that to me feels like a really powerful antidote to the zombification, because like I'm a big fan of crowding stuff out as well. Like if we're struggling with something, it's like, how can I insert all these other really meaningful, juicy things into my life that are going to make my phone seem like the most boring thing in the world? If I am becoming more and more fascinated with the bird life around me, or the type of plants that I might be able to forage and eat and use for medicine around me, that feels so much more exciting than checking Instagram. And I'm saying this as a person who probably touches my phone 27,000 times a day and is always practicing, trying to remind myself gently that that's probably not a great place for me to hang out. But I mean, those little things, like I think the work of Joanna Macy and the work that reconnects, when we look at how can we start participating in this more than human world that it is all around us and part of us. Like I said, Joanna Macy's work is really wonderful, those small exercises. And then even really playful, kind of funny experiments that you can run yourself at home to wake yourself up to a bit of joy and wonderment. Like my partner Jordan and I last year in the dead of winter decided it would be a fun experiment to turn off our gas hot water system and just see what happened. We had a fireplace at the time. And so it meant that if we didn't have hot water on demand, we would have to boil a big pot of water on the fireplace for a really long time and then figure out how to wash ourselves in a super cold bathroom or with a little flannelette. We had to think about a whole new set of logistics for doing our dishes. It was just, you know, when you take something away, like subtraction can be a really fun game to play as well. And then the other piece that I like to add, because I'm a writer and communicator, and this may not be for everyone, but then talk about it. Or if you want to use social media, at least use that for some quality storytelling. Like tell people what you're up to and spark some joy and delight in the community around you as well, because I think being playful in that way is a really great antidote to some of the seriousness of the environmental movement.
That's a really good idea, because I do think sometimes, well, obviously there's the dopamine hit that we're all trying to get, which is manufactured by social media. And it's not that it's not harder to get in other ways. It's just not as instantaneous as maybe, you know, you have to retrain your brain, and it's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do. I don't want anyone to think it is. One of the things I've been doing is sometimes I pick up my phone out of habit, not because it's not because I have no FOMO. I have no fear of missing out. Like I'm way past that in my life, but I pick it up out of habit. And so what I've been trying to do instead of, like, you know, I'm just sitting around, like I'm doing something, I'm waiting for the water to boil or whatever. Instead of picking up my phone and scrolling, I pick up my book instead, right? To read or do something else, because it's so easy. Because once you pick it up, before you know it, you have scrolled through half an hour worth of stuff you don't even really care about, or stuff that makes you angry, because that's what social media does.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's the thing. I was writing to some of my newsletter people, the subscribers, you know, it's so easy to just let that time go away from you. And what you have to do is choose not only that you want to spend your time on social media, but who you want to spend that time with. So is it with somebody who is inspiring me to try something different, to do something different, not someone who leaves me feeling angry or like I'm not doing enough or whatever. So that's a really hard thing.
Yeah.
All right.
Even like, I think having an expectation that can help ease that transition, say that you feel very addicted to your phone, your device, even expecting that doing something new, there's going to be resistance, there's going to be this swampy, muddy, murky, sticky feeling of having to wade in a different direction. And for me, that really helps. It's like if I want to move to picking up my book more than touching my phone, maybe the first few times or maybe for the first few minutes of that activity, I might feel like a lot of resistance, a lot of begrudgingness, a lot of like, oh, this is really hard. I could have gotten that yummy little schmacko from my phone like instantaneously. But having that cognitive expectation that, okay, it's just going to take me a little while to find my groove with this. And then soon enough, as I'm sure you experience as well, Catie, like you're out sailing in open water. You've just got to get through that little swampy bit at the start. And so even reminding myself that of when I'm trying to change a habit or instate something altogether, you know, more uncomfortable, but more richly rewarding, there's going to be a little bit of time that it feels quite tricky and sticky, but that's just how it is.
Right. And a little discomfort. Okay, never hurt anyone. I used to run medium to long distances. I was injured a few years ago. I haven't quite recovered. I'm hoping to get back to it. But the thing is, you don't start, right? You don't start on day one running 26 miles. You run 1 mile, maybe not even that. You might run 10 feet and then have to walk 10 feet and then maybe run another 10 feet or whatever. So, and I think it's the same thing with anything. It's a muscle, right? It's just a muscle. You have to build. It doesn't happen naturally for anyone. No one starts out at 100%. You just got to keep working at it. And a little discomfort is good for us. And that actually leads to my next question, because, excuse me, you had mentioned about comfort. It's appealing, but it actually can kind of work against us in terms of finding satisfaction and joy, because really very little growth in a personal sense, or in any sense, but certainly in a personal sense, happens from a place of complete comfort, right? Because when you're in a place of complete comfort. It's not always you're not doing anything. You're just staying very stationary. I have a friend locally who is a novelist, and I happen to take one of her writing classes. We're really good friends now. But she happened to mention one time that she never really wants her life to be in balance, because when you're in balance, it means it's like this. And she always wants it to be kind of, sometimes I'm doing a little more of this, and sometimes I'm doing a little more of this, and that's okay. And I think that's true. So can you kind of expound on that? Like, what do you think about comfort and how it
Yep.
can maybe not be the best place for us all the time?
Totally. Yeah. And I love that your friend says that, because often balance is such a darling of, the wellness world and the alternative spheres, like striving for balance. And really, I've often thought, when I'm riding a bike, I'm not actually, I'm balanced, but my feet are moving up and down. Everything's oscillating and going from one extreme to another. So is balance actually more of a dynamic, like a polarity, things moving between different states constantly to give us that sense of equilibrium? But within that, there's actually a lot of movement. So I agree with your friend wholeheartedly. And I just want to say, like, this is something that it feels a huge unlearning for me. Like, to your previous comments about having to do things incrementally to get where we want to go. As a product of a conventional schooling system, I never learned how to work bit by bit towards something that I really cared about. I learned how to do more of what I was already good at and get an award. Like, that was my schooling. That was my indoctrination. So actually doing things that are uncomfortable, or I have to grind a little bit, or have to sit with something that isn't perfect, it just does not come easily to me, because I think, it was the curse of the blessing of being a good student academically in my younger years. I just coasted my way through that education, and consequently, I'm having to unlearn and kind of reparent myself as a mid-30-year-old. And that actually feels, there's a lot of grief for me around that. I was like, why can't I just be one of those enlightened unschoolers who just seem to be so self-directed and so good at wisely creating uncomfortable growth experiences for themselves? So maybe a lot of people relate to that, having these hang-ups, this baggage from our traditional schooling that takes a little bit of reframing, I suppose.
So do you think, I think our modern culture, to some extent, I don't think this is true, but I think that social media makes it seem like there's very little contrast, right? Especially because the algorithms are so good, right? Like, they show you what you're interested in. That doesn't necessarily mean everyone's doing that, right? Like, I know not everyone gardens, but if you looked at my algorithm, like my feed, it's all beautiful gardens. So you would think everyone gardens, but that's not it. So, but I think we remove kind of this opportunity for contrast, which probably, to your point, yes, it removes our opportunities to learn and to try. And I have run into people recently. I'm wired to be like, how hard could it be? I can do it. Like, that's how I am about everything. And thankfully my husband is the same way. And between the two of us, there's very little we can't figure out.
What an asset. Amazing.
Yeah, we just try. But I meet a lot of people who are not that way. And so I feel like, okay, maybe we do need to kind of introduce that to ourselves, because it can impact our creativity and our resiliency, not only for ourselves, but for our communities, I think.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Like, so do you think we can build, or somehow, how do you think we can, like, include small, intentional discomforts, kind of like turning off your water heater?
Yeah.
But are there other examples that you can think of that we could do to just make ourselves a little discomfort? Not a lot. I'm not saying that anyone has to, like, run naked through the woods in the middle of winter. But
I do know some people who do that.
Yeah, no, I know it. There's people here, they do the polar bear plunges and everything. That is not ever going to be me. But, bless your heart, do what you want. Extreme, I'm not encouraging. I don't want anyone to feel like I'm encouraging them to live in a life of extreme hardship, because I don't want that for anyone. Because there's plenty of people who have to do that, and that part breaks my heart. So for those of us who are privileged enough to not have to live hardship, but how can we include some discomfort, do you think?
Yeah, totally. And again, this is always my default starting point is having compassion. Like, I have a lot of compassion for how we've ended up in this temperature controlled, easeful, cushy, vegetative state as a society. Like, infinite compassion for how we've gotten here, because of course it is a survival imperative to have enough food, to have to be, the right temperature so that our enzymes work and we stay alive. Like, there are some really real survival needs that I think drive this comfort seeking behavior, looking for paths of least resistance, finding elegant, efficient solutions to problems that we might have. Like, that's normal for a human person. And I see that in the animal world, the botanical world, like, very understandable how that, the seed of that inside of us. I think what's happened is that we've been able to just explode those limits on our behaviors thanks to a glut of energy in the form of fossil fuels and, other such invisible slaves that we have working for us at all times because of those resources. So I always start with that, maybe that's just me. I have a lot of understanding, and I see that it's almost, I don't want to say inevitable in a kind of defeatist sense, like it's just inevitable that we're at this point and there's nothing we can do. But I think it's understandable how we've ended up here. So, and in light of the fact that I am a creature of comfort and I will definitely just ferment on the couch if left to my own devices, what I really like to do is use togetherness as a bit of a superpower for doing things that I'm a little bit or a lot afraid of. And you mentioned the word community, and I am lucky enough to be part of a super unusual, I think at this point, community who does a lot of ritualistic, ceremonial, not in a weird kind of goat sacrificing way, but in a really grounded, earth-centric, practicing a new old culture kind of way. So there are a lot of things that I know I won't do myself, but when I go to that, go to that women's circle that my friend runs, and I am couched in that sacred container that Meg, my friend, creates, and I'm safe to cry about something or to open up in that space, and that feels uncomfortable before I go, and then I can actually soak in that web of safety that other people create and solidarity. And I think we're designed to do things like that together. And so definitely calling on friends and community to help coax me into spaces and places and towards edges that I wouldn't otherwise broach. An example of that, I mean, it's more, I guess, extreme, and maybe some people wouldn't want to do this, but that same woman, Meg, who runs our local women's circle, does so much work for people in the community and offers free of charge kind of rites of passage that are based on, very universal principles of initiation, I guess, drawing from initiation processes and ceremonies from cultures around the world. And recently I went through a process with Meg and two other women that we called a vigil. And essentially I was scared witless. Like, I was feeling so sick about this process right up until I was walking out there with them. But the idea was, and I mean, what we all did was spend 3 days in the forest quite close to our home in separate little nooks and crannies that we'd found for ourselves. We didn't have a tent. We didn't have any food. We just had water. We just had a sleeping bag and a tarp that we could use to shelter from the rain. And it did rain a lot over those 3 days. And that was a chance to totally disconnect from my crutches and distractions and connect with the birds and the marsupials and the mosses and the trees and the weeds and the loam of my home soil, like out there sitting in the bush for 3 days. I'd never fasted for that long. I'd never gone without a delicious breakfast, like a day in my life. And so that experience, whilst so edgy and so uncomfortable and something I was dreading, what would I discover in myself? What would I go absolutely insane? Would I run through the forest without clothes screaming for help? I didn't know what was going to happen. But I also knew that those kind of experiences, so rare or non-existent in our culture, are the stuff of life for our ancestors, were the stuff of life for our ancestors. And I believe in reintegrating them into our culture. So that's a big example of how an uncomfortable experience for a prolonged length of time was so meaningful, so rich to me. I mean, the clarity that I felt after those 3 days in the forest, like I was thinking and speaking like I never knew was possible. I think it was coming from my stripped back essential self, which was just crazy to me, like, wow, what an amazing thing to meet that part of me that was buried under all of the dopamine hits and the whatever else I pile on top of it. So the reason I could go through that process as a someone who shies away from being hungry and being scared and being in the dark and being on my own and all of these things that are quite terrifying, the reason I could do that is because I was out there with Meg and Tawny and Tully, members of my community who were also holding that space, and we were doing it together. So I would just say for anyone who wants to challenge themselves in healthy ways and ancient ways, that get together with other people to try that out, because that's where you can derive that sense of motivation and solidarity, and not just wish that that was your life, wish that you could plumb the depths of your inner self. Get together with others and do it despite the fear that you might feel.
Right. Yeah, it's hard, right? It's hard to do things when you're afraid. Everybody gets afraid, but there is something to be said for doing it afraid. Because there's never going to be a perfect time. There's never going to be a right time. There's always going to be some. If you don't just push through, there's always going to be some reason not to push through.
Yeah, I always say just do it begrudgingly. Like I tell myself, just do it, even if you're pouting, like sticking your bottom lip out like a little child. You don't want to do this. Just do it begrudgingly. That's not to say do things you fundamentally don't agree with or that aren't aligned with your values. But it's like, I know there's something that I want to do, but I'm like, I don't want to. Just do it, even if you're grumpy about it, because afterwards you'll feel amazing that you did.
And sometimes don't you find that if you do it grumpy, you come out the other side happy?
Exactly.
I know, I do. Yeah, I definitely do. And I'm going to say this because I talk about community a lot on the podcast because I think it's really important. But I'm an introvert. And so there are plenty of times. In fact, there's on Saturday night here, there's a potluck for our local activist group. And it's the end of summer potluck. And like, I have such a good time when I get there. But I'm already thinking of like excuses not to go. But I'm going to go. I'm going to be unhappy about it until I get there. And then I will be happy about it. And I know. So, sometimes we just have to my grandmother would say, just do it anyway, Buttercup, suck it up. And I am just like, okay, suck it up, Buttercup. You're an adult. You can do this. Yeah. And no one ever died from being a little uncomfortable. So if you're a little grumpy, just do it. Put on your big girl pants. You'll be okay. You will. It's true because community can be really hard. Nikki Black has a great podcast called Interrupting Everything. And she talks about community, and she says all the time, community is not just your friends. It's also the people that you maybe don't like that much. And that's a really good thing to remember. Like sometimes we have to be community members, even if those aren't the same people that you want to hang out with.
Yeah.
So it's hard because that can be a discomfort muscle we can all maybe work a little bit. Because what happens is we do stay in these circles, again, of comfort, of people that we really like. Whereas sometimes if we allow ourselves to be around people who maybe aren't our friends, but are still good and decent people. I'm not talking about putting ourselves in danger.
Yeah.
In any way.
Totally.
But like people who, they're just not people you jive with for whatever reason. Yeah. We still should be around them because that's an important part of community and that's an important part of resilience and humanness.
Totally. Humanness. Yeah. I mean, you don't see, I think ecosystems are riots of diversity. A healthy ecosystem is always a bit of a melting pot. And
that's right.
I love thinking of the neighbor sphere, which is the people in your immediate vicinity. You haven't necessarily chosen your neighbors based on their values or their personalities. They're just there. But really, when you think about resilience into the future, it's going to be the people right alongside you, butting up against your house, sharing the commons near you, who are going to be your greatest allies and assets. And it's also such a great antidote to the othering that we see so rife on social media. If we can get along with people, I mean, even just seeing why people are the way they are, that is truly medicine for writing people off in society or thinking that the problem is over there and, localized to someone else. Like that's just not really going to get us anywhere, that kind of warring mentality. So you can start with the people in your street.
Okay. So let me ask you a question, because obviously this is the Quiet Rebellion. And the idea behind the Quiet Rebellion is we're rebelling against the status quo. And we talk about a lot of different things. We talk about mending, and we talk about managing money on occasion. We talk about living cozy. We did have a whole episode on choosing a cozy life, but a cozy life that was centered around people and not market, not market driven. We're not talking about buying things. But so what do you think, in a way of embracing weariness and contrast, How do you think that can help us rebel against the status quo?
Yeah, beautiful. I suppose I'm going to stretch the definition of contrast a little bit to include contrarianism. So seeing things from a different perspective. And I guess contrast, it is all about those things that seem quite opposite and ways we can kind of put things together that might not necessarily fit in our assumptions and beliefs. So I think one way, which is my preferred method, which I feel like I've been doing since I was a small child unconsciously, or without any type of activism associated with it. But I like leaning into the contrarianness, so a contrasting viewpoint, and really trying to think, okay, what is the opposite of this prevalent belief, or the opposite of, you know, this solution that's being offered? Or if I've got such a strong opinion that something is one way, what could be the polar opposite of that thing? And I suppose rebelling against the status quo, which, you know, it's not only a broken system. I don't think it's really, it's not making anyone happy. No one, even I would say, who has all of the trappings of wealth and material success, like, I don't know how deeply satisfied those people are. I mean, I can't know for sure, but I just don't think that it's even, you know, at the top of the pyramid that anyone's like super stoked about that life. So I guess testing out contrasting views and reading contrasting things. And like just this morning, I was reading an article about Maslow. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a lot of people are familiar with, but he spent time with, actually in Montana, I believe, with the Blackfoot Nation there, with local peoples for a number of weeks before he was kind of formulating his hierarchy of needs. And I was just reading about this morning, and it felt like the way that the Blackfoot Nation conducted their culture and the way they performed life was so different to what our culture says is just the way things are. So in this society, in the Blackfoot life, my understanding is, based on this article and Maslow's observations, was that the truest marker of wealth was the person who had the least, because they were the most generous. They'd given everything away. And that's a complete inversion of what we see as being rich and powerful and hoarding of resources. It's actually possible that true wealth could be having nothing, because you're the person who's able to share that around with your community and with people who don't have enough. And I mean, there were so many examples in that culture of radically contrasting or contrarian views of contrarian ways of being, that I think it almost brought me to tears reading this morning, because it's like that just opens up this possibility then in my mind. Things aren't just how this dominant culture has told me they are. It's not, you know, we don't have to reach towards this definition of success, because there have been so many precedents, and there are precedents for people doing things so differently. And that rebellion or that awakening can start with simply reading about, like, who else is up to cool stuff out there. And that just, that complete inversion of like what we see as normal in traditional cultures, or in, you know, even places like my community back home where I'm in central Victoria, people are just challenging the status quo and kind of flipping it on its head. So I think that's a really good place to start, just inhabiting that childlike questioning.
I do think why. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead, Catie.
No, go ahead. I was going to say, have you read the book Have you read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Walker?
A really long time ago.
Okay, yeah. So she does talk a lot about reciprocity and that kind of thing, which is what you're talking about too. And so it just made me think of that. And I don't live very far from the traditional Blackfoot home. I don't live very far from the reservation, actually.
Wow.
Or their traditional homes. I live on the traditional home of the Salish and Kootenai, but not very far from the Blackfoot reservation. So I'm very familiar. Yeah, I do agree with you. We have to kind of read and understand that the way that we're living right now is really very new in terms of like human history. Right? Like, it's only maybe a couple hundred years old, maybe 1,000 at the most. So we just have to realize that these narratives that we're currently told about success and about happiness and comfort are probably they're not universally true, if they're true at all, and it seems like you and I agree that they're probably not true for most people. If you're on that path, you probably don't feel like it's the one. So what do you think a culture that truly values kind of this idea of wonderment from wearies, what would it look like, do you think? How can we create it? Can we start creating it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not quite sure about the, like, where that weariness piece fits for me. I'm not sure I'd phrase it
Right.
like that, but definitely wonderment. I mean, I think that human centrism, our view of ourselves as exceptional and therefore licensed to ransack the planet of its resources, at the heart of so many of the problems that we're facing. So wonderment to me is a counterpoint to that, where I can go outside and absolutely marvel at the intelligence and the wisdom and the beauty and the awe-inspiringness of the world around me, and realize that whilst it's not about putting humans below all of that, it's like it's the web, we're part of it. And so I definitely think a culture that, even as a starting point, seeks to marvel and see the magic of all of the simplest things around us. As just reading about, they're wanting to use AI to understand whale song, to hear that maybe the whales are trying to tell us something about us desecrating their environment. And I just think, why do we need to solve that mystery? Leave the whales alone. And it's no mystery in a way of, what we're doing to the seas that the whales might be kind of pissed off about. So we don't need some newfangled energy hungry technology to key us in to what's happening out there. And also, we don't need to solve every single mystery. We don't need to know everything and reach, the furthest
Right.
corners of the cosmos. It's like there is enough right here for us to just go, wow. Just before this interview, I was running along the beach just out here, a magical place to be, and I saw a cormorant, like a water bird, dive and surface with this huge silver fish in his beak, like a brim. And I've had the question, oh, I wonder how big a fish one of these birds can catch. They've only got a little beak. Well, the answer is like a big fish, and just could swallow it whole. And I watched that and I just felt like I don't even need, answers to the big problems in life. I just need to worship at the altar of this wonderful wild world that's right outside our doorstep. I think starting there, a culture that sees that and values that and acknowledges that. I mean, there's a huge value in just acknowledging Gaia, whatever you want to call it, the miraculous intelligence that connects us all, even just acknowledging and seeing that. I think that we all want to be seen and acknowledged. So starting there and healing that sense of separation that has happened at whatever point in our history, that severance of humans and the more than human world, but kind of suturing that back up with these moments of wonderment. And I mean, a culture where weariness is a valued part of our day because we're working purposefully in service of the things that really matter to us locally in our own home soil. I mean, that would be a good indication for me that we're on the right track, that, we disparage manual labor. We still see jobs involving the physical form, involving the soil, involving food as the lowliest of positions to have. But I mean, what if we exalted farmers as the absolute heroes of the day, or people who are willing to engage and participate in those systems that feed us, that keep us alive? Like,
I know.
weariness from those quality essential endeavors, I think would also be a really great thing for our culture. Yeah. And I suppose just one portrait of a possibility of this more reverential, nature-connected culture that I really believe is a great way forward is the film that my partner's just created. It's a documentary film that we're actually traveling around touring right now, and it's called The New Peasants, and it'll be online, I think, next year. But I just wanted to say, as a kind of a buffet of cultural possibilities, film The New Peasants by Happen Films is just, it's just delightful. It's showing us how we can perform a culture that is far more connected. And yeah, that involves hard work and weariness and bedragglement, and seeing the blessings in that can, to me, be part of such a beautiful, rich life that is really deeply satisfying. Francis Weller talks about this extensively, that we have this culture that's kind of worshipping these secondary needs of humans, when really the primary needs, the simple stuff that you can't buy, being in community, growing your own food, being in the sunshine, like that, they're the primary needs of humans that we've kind of forgotten about. So yeah, I think there's some really great avenues of exploration in some of those those writings and films as well.
It's just like, it's such a sign of our times that like an AI company that is like using so much water to function, right? Because they use so much water. Wants to find, I mean, like that. Yes, the irony of that is just, oh my goodness gracious. Yeah, it's just horrific.
Yeah, I know. Oh.
But it was just like, when you said that, I was just like, because I hadn't heard that, but then I was just like, oh goodness, is that just like, it's just like upside down. It's just the most upside down thing, but that is very much the times that we are living in, and it's a little heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Well, Catie, please, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. Tell everybody where they can find you, please, and I'll make sure to include links, of course.
Thank you, Catie. It's been so lovely to share with you and your listeners. It's such a treat. So I am at the Reskillience podcast. I have avoided using social media for that podcast. So you'll pretty much only find it on podcasting platforms, Apple, Spotify. Reskillience, which is resilience and skills kind of smushed together in a portmanteau. And I also have a website, Catie, which is catie.com.au, which is sorely in need of an update. And maybe this will kick me in the pants to do that. But the Reskillience podcast is your best bet.
It's the way of websites in general. They always need an update. I think it's just a sad thing. But yeah, and you have other things that are more interesting, probably, no doubt. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed this chat.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Catie.